Welcome to Digging Roots, where we uncover family stories, hidden histories, and the moments that connect us to who we are. We're heading back into the fascinating history of the Albee family. If you'd like to catch up on their story so far, check out the links to the earlier videos below. By the time the war ended, James had already started building a new future. In 1671, just 4 years before the attack, he had married Hannah Cook, the daughter of Walter Cook, a fellow settler of Mendon and an immigrant from Leeds, England. Together, James and Hannah had 8 children, a sign that despite war and loss, life could go on. Among them was a son named John, born in 1678, a child born into a town still recovering from the flames of war. In the wake of King Philip's War, the New England colonies worked to rebuild what had been lost. Mendon, once a thriving settlement, had been abandoned for 5 years. But in 1680, the town officially reopened, welcoming back those willing to start over from nothing. James was among them. Brick by brick, board by board, the town was rebuilt. The Albee family, once among Mendon's founders, became part of its rebirth. But survival wasn't just about rebuilding homes, it was about ensuring the next generation would never be driven away again. James and Hannah's son, John Albee, was born into a new Mendon, one built on resilience and determination. In 1705, he married Deborah Thayer, another member of an early Massachusetts family. Like his father, John chose to stay in Mendon, raising his family on the same land his grandfather had once settled. They had many children, including another son named John, a name that continued through the generations, a name that had once been lost to war, but now symbolized endurance and legacy. The Albees had survived war, destruction, and loss, but they had refused to disappear. Through James Albee's determination, Mendon had been rebuilt. Through his son John, the family had endured. The next generation of Albees would spread outward, shaping New England and beyond. For decades, the Albee family had been part of the foundation of Mendon, Massachusetts. They had survived wars, massacres, and hardship, carving out a life of the untamed wilderness. Now they were about to create a new nation. In 1774, as tensions between the American colonies and British rule reached their breaking point, the Massachusetts Provincial Congress called for a local militias to train. The people of Massachusetts knew that war was coming. It was only a matter of when. Among those preparing for battle was Captain John Albee II, born in 1720. A respected leader in the Mendon militia. His eldest son, Zariel, just 28 years old, stood ready beside him as a private. On the night of April 18, 1775, the warning came. Dr. Joseph Warren, an American patriot in Boston, sent an urgent message. British troops were on the move. Their target, Lexington and Concord. In the dead of night, Paul Revere and William Dawes rode through the countryside, warning militias that the war for independence was about to begin. At dawn, the first gunshots rang out in Lexington. By the afternoon, the war had spread to Concord, and colonial militias rushed in from all directions. Among them was Captain John Albee and his son Zariel. On April 19, 1775, as the sun rose over Massachusetts, the first shots of the American Revolution echoed across the fields of Lexington. At Concord, the British suffered their first real losses. Forced into retreat, their 1,700 soldiers were relentlessly fired upon as they marched back toward Boston. The Massachusetts militia wasted no time. As the British reached Roxbury, just outside of Boston, John Albee and his company joined the blockade, trapping the British inside the city. For almost a year, the British forces under General William Howe were held up inside Boston, unable to escape by land. Under General John Thomas, the colonial forces set up camp in Roxbury, keeping the British contained until March 1776. The siege finally ended when the Americans fortified Dorchester Heights with cannons hauled from Fort Ticonderoga in New York. With the British now outgunned, they had no choice but to board ships and abandon Boston. On March 17, 1776, British ships set sail, never to return. Today, this event is still commemorated in Boston as Evacuation Day, the moment when America won its first victory against the British Empire and ended their 8-year occupation of Boston. Though their engagement only lasted a little over a week, both John and Zariah Albee returned home to Mendon as heroes. The war was far from over. Battles would rage across the colonies for another 7 years. But they had played their part in the first major step towards American independence. Their fight was more than just a battle. It was the beginning of a nation, a stand against tyranny, and a moment that would define the course of history. The Albee family had survived the birth of a country, and their story was far from over. The Albees had built towns, fought wars, and rebuilt after tragedy, but this war was different. This was not just about survival, it was about freedom. The American Revolution changed everything. It gave the Albee family a new identity, not just as settlers, but as Americans. And from this moment forward, their story would be a part of the story of the nation. Fresh from battle, Zariah Albee returned home to Mendon, not just as a veteran of the Revolution, but as a man ready to build a future. In March of 1776, just as the British fled Boston, Zariah married Anne Penniman, a woman whose family roots ran deep as his own. Anne Penniman came from a long line of early American settlers. Her ancestors had emigrated from Essex, England, to the Massachusetts Bay Colony in 1631, arriving aboard the ship Lion. Like the Albees, her family had been among the first to establish towns in the New World, settling in Braintree, Massachusetts. Now, with their marriage, two families, both deeply woven into the fabric of early America, became one. Though Zariah had once marched into battle, his true calling was the land. He built a life as a farmer, providing for his growing family. But life in Mendon wouldn't last forever. The country was changing, and new opportunities lay to the north. The Albees first moved to Westmoreland, New Hampshire, a quiet farming town along the Connecticut River. Here, they worked the land, raising their children in the rolling countryside. But once again, Zariah felt the pull of something new, something untamed. The family relocated once more, this time to Littleton, New Hampshire, where they would lay down roots for generations to come. Zariah and Anne had many children, ensuring that the Albee name would continue to spread across New England. Among them was Otis Albee, born in Littleton, New Hampshire, a son who would carry forward the legacy of the family just as his father and grandfather before him had. For generations, the Albees had built their lives in Massachusetts and New Hampshire, clearing land, farming, and shaping the early American colonies. But by the early 1800s, the world was changing. A new frontier was opening, and the promise of land and opportunity lay far beyond the familiar hills of New England. Leading the next chapter of the family's journey was Otis Alexander Albee. Born in Littleton, New Hampshire in 1780, Otis Albee grew up surrounded by rugged farmland and towering forests, a life shaped by hard work, faith, and politics. In 1807, he married Melinda Huntoon, a woman with deep New England roots. The Huntoon family's story was one of resolve and reinvention. Melinda's ancestor, Philip Huntoon, had emigrated to America from Hampshire, England, as a young boy. One story claims that Philip, the younger son of an English gentleman, felt wronged by his family's inheritance and resolved to seek his fortune in the New World. Upon arriving in Exeter, New Hampshire, Philip found work under Ralph Hall, a craftsman who specialized in making pipe staves, narrow wooden strips used for barrels, and even early water pipes. It was through Ralph Hall that Philip met his daughter, Betsy. They fell in love, married, and began a family line that would eventually lead to Melinda. And now, with her marriage to Otis, the Albee and Huntoon families would become forever entwined. Otis was a man of strong convictions. He was a Democrat, deeply engaged in the political debates of the time. He was also a Methodist, following a faith that emphasized hard work, morality, and personal responsibility. But above all, Otis was a father. He and Melinda had 8 children, all of them sons. Tragedy struck in 1843 when Melinda passed away. She was laid to rest in Wheeler Hill Cemetery in the quiet town of Littleton, New Hampshire. For Otis, life in New England no longer held the same promise. By the 1850s, a new opportunity was calling: the West. The American frontier was pushing further west, and thousands of families were making the treacherous journey in search of new land, new fortunes, and new beginnings. Otis and his 8 sons joined the movement, leaving New Hampshire behind and heading for the Wisconsin Territory. It was a journey over 1,000 miles, one filled with uncertainty, hardship, and the unknown. Settlers moving west had to navigate rough trails through dense forests. Wagons could be lost in an instant at treacherous river crossings, and diseases and accidents that could claim lives before they could even reach their destination. But Otis and his family made it. By 1857, they had settled in Madison, Wisconsin, a city on the rise where land was plentiful and opportunities were growing. The same year, Otis Albee passed away, marking the end of an era for the Albee family in New England, but the beginning of a new chapter in the American Midwest. For generations, the Albees had been builders, farmers, and pioneers. Otis and his family had crossed the country, leaving behind the familiar landscapes of New England for the promise of the western frontier. His journey was not just about finding new land, it was about carrying forward the Albee legacy, ensuring that his sons and their sons after them would continue the story. The Albee family story continues to unfold, one piece at a time. If you've got family stories of your own, share them in the comments. We'd love to hear them. Stay tuned, there's always more to discover. Thanks for joining us on our journey. Please like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time on Digging Roots.